not recording. I'm not
Uh,
recording you at all. Okay, so right,
I
what
was just
the
surprised
fuck?
that you hadn't. I
What?
was just surprised you hadn't heard about Theranos. So had you really not heard about it before?
No, well, so over the past 2 months, I've seen. I don't know why it's coming up now, but I've seen on
It's
YouTube.
because they're in court right now on wire fraud
Ah,
charges.
that's why. Okay, right. So I saw a bunch of videos with a very elegant looking lady holding something and a big title under it saying Theranos. I thought it was a bullshit film. I thought it was some kind of crappy film because it looks like a crappy movie poster. I had
Yeah.
no idea what was going on. And honestly, this is. I mean,
So,
so Hyperloop, we need to talk about as well because Hyperloop is fucking ridiculous. But I'm. This is like the example of bullshit Silicon Valley scams.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's the great shame of Silicon Valley in their terms. Like obviously the great shame of Silicon Valley is giving us things like social media, which is destroying our society from the inside out. But
Yep.
in the context of what they understand, it's their great shame because she took them to the fucking cleaners.
So
Like
what this really reminds me of is like the OneCoin scandal, which was the same thing in the financial world, right? Where this
is
person, huh?
is it's ongoing.
What,
It's still
Theranos or OneCoin?
OneCoin. You can still buy OneCoin.
Oh, I know you can still buy OneCoin, and that's.
Mm.
Do you know that there's a whole like subculture of people still trying to justify why OneCoin is a good investment?
It's tragic though because it's the reason why they're doing that is because they've invested huge amounts of money into
Yeah,
it.
of course. It's yeah. I was about to say it's like Cloud Imperium, but then that's a whole other rabbit hole.
Mm.
But right, so I have only discovered what Theranos is in the last 10 minutes. So it is a medical company, or was a medical company, that promised to do blood tests, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
In a way that seems like magic.
That
I
is also correct.
What I really don't understand about it, and the things you sent seem to say a lot about the insanity of what's her name? Something
Katie
Holmes.
Holmes.
Huh?
Katie Holmes.
Isn't Katie Holmes an actress?
Is it?
It's something Holmes.
Something Holmes. Oh, that's really bad. Let me find out. Elizabeth Holmes.
Elizabeth Holmes. Close enough. Um, so there's a lot about her and a lot about the connections that she had and the story of how she scammed these people. But there's almost nothing about what this supposed product was supposed to be. And of course, being a physicist, the first thing I wanted to know was what they claimed this was and what it did. And there's just
So,
nothing on it.
well, I mean, it's essentially the point. Like, yeah, that there is nothing out there because this all happened actually quite a few years ago now. Is when they were at their height,
Right.
and because there was no product. There's nothing to like. If you watch, there's several kind of initial promotional videos out there.
Yeah.
With her describing her vision, and basically her vision is this: she's like, there's this, this. We'll talk about her Steve Jobs imitation persona.
Yeah.
She even hired the same advertising agency that did the famous Apple branding. Anyway, but the what was I saying? The
product.
product is basically. She was like, it's tragic that people have to go, undiagnosed due to like long laborious like blood testing. We are going to basically make a product which will be able to, and this is what they claim they could do. It was a patch you wear with microneedles that can basically sample the blood like directly. It then performs some analysis on it in inverted commas, and then links up wirelessly with some cloud-based service, which will then compute somehow what condition you have based on that analysis in inverted commas. And then that was it. Initially, that was it. And then I think later on they added the extra stretch goal of actually administering drugs. Now, of course, this doesn't take into account the fact that, firstly, this has long been a goal of like the blood testing industry to reduce the amount of blood that you need in order to
Mm-hmm.
do blood testing, and millions of man hours and billions of dollars have been invested in trying to solve this problem to no avail.
Yep.
Like, you still need 3 tubes of blood to be able to get any meaningful blood testing done.
Yep.
And it's just
There's something missing. There's something missing from this story, though, because at no point in there did you say that it uploads that information to a blockchain.
No. Well, I wouldn't be surprised. I
And
mean, if I
clearly, that was the missing link, and it all would have worked if they just used a
it
blockchain.
would. But if you know anything, I mean, I'm not a I don't know. Is it a phlebotomist? They're the people who
Phlebotomist, yep, is somebody.
take,
Oh,
right? They don't analyze.
yes, they take blood. I don't think they're necessarily the people who test it.
All right. Well, I'm not a blood testing person, so I wouldn't claim to understand about how these things work. However, I do understand about statistics and about measuring things generally, and it's just like the idea that you can diagnose hundreds of different diseases that have different manifestations, like different mechanisms by which they are represented in the blood.
Mhm.
Um, by on a device that can strap around your wrist is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like it's a degree of stupidity, a degree of ludicrousness that is so far beyond
But
what is like.
I'm starting to understand how it went as far as it did, because originally what people were saying in the videos that you sent seemed like someone had said, I am going to fly to the moon in a dishwasher. And everyone had said, oh, sure, yeah, we'll give you $9 billion. It was so unbelievably ludicrous. And the thing is, most of these kind of ridiculous tech scams, which is the majority of the tech industry at the moment, the nefarious thing about them is they have that degree of plausibility where you can sort of intuitively see, oh yeah, I can see how that would work.
Yeah.
And what was being described was, this tiny patch that you would wear that would somehow diagnose every possible disease and then instantly treat you with the appropriate drug, apparently without having to be interfered with externally, which is basically just magic. And I couldn't see how anyone could possibly be fooled by that. When you start talking about, oh, it's a patch that's going to have micro needles and it's going to have some sort of, microfluidic. I mean, I'm taking it further than she did, just thinking off the top of my head.
No, you're not. You're not actually. Like, if you look, they filed a patent. If you look at the details of the patent, they talk about these microneedles and the
Right.
capillary action and.
So was the patent granted?
Yes, it was. It was ridiculous. Well, actually, I don't know. Like, I've just seen the application, so maybe I don't know if they actually got it accepted, but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, there are patents out there for things like the patenting the action of like clicking on a link in a web browser with a mouse. I mean, it's just like
I know, but this is one of the other massive travesties of technology is the degradation of patenting.
Yeah,
because patenting has always been something that is filled with backroom dealing. I mean, one of the very first patents granted in history was based on stolen research, but which was Arkwright's mill. But you generally expect that patent clerks will have a degree of integrity and a degree of expertise that is actually appropriate, and you just can't rely on that anymore. And I remember, you read about things like hyperstealth, which I know I go on about, but you read about something like that, and you've got this crazy guy who's saying, "Oh yeah, I'm going to patent this and that, and I'm going to make this system, and I've submitted this incredibly vague patent." And you look at the actual patent applications that have been filed, and they're so incredibly poorly thought out and so vague that they're basically, if they're granted, that person is in a position to sue every company in the entire world
Yeah.
from now until the end of time for any invention. And you think there's no way that could possibly be granted. It's so ridiculous. And then it goes through. And that's
Yeah.
terrifying.
Well, I mean, yeah, I feel like we don't want to go down the rabbit hole of
No,
patent.
sure.
I think
Yeah.
it's a whole other kettle of
But
fish.
yeah, but um it at least sounds moderately reasonable. You can think, oh yeah, micro needles and microfluidic circuits and things. That sounds like it could work. And
But that's the scam, isn't
yeah,
it?
and
It's
then you have someone who has that force of personality and has that kind of cult-like status around them where they can make people, but they can push people to believe that something that's on the edge of believability is definitely true.
Yes, I think that's it. My understanding is based on anecdotal evidence that I've heard secondhand and probably nth hand. She was in fact rejected by a number of VC firms
Hmm.
initially because, of course, it's a load of bollocks.
Yeah,
Um, but then,
it only
you know,
takes one.
it only takes one, and then you get that credibility.
Yeah.
Um,
Because
you
yeah,
know,
that's a really important point. Because one of the things that's universal, even outside of private technology firms and venture capital, is exactly what you just said. That plausibility, that reputation, where one of the key questions that's asked if somebody is looking at investing money in you is, has someone else invested? And
yes,
I remember seeing this firsthand with someone who I'm not going to name, who tried to start a ridiculous, absurd business and was struggling to get anywhere until this crazy venture capital firm decided to invest, I think it was like 50 grand in his company. And then suddenly he couldn't beat investors off with a stick. The idea hadn't changed. The idea was still ridiculous. But just the
yeah.
fact that somebody else had put money in it gave them huge amounts of confidence, misplaced confidence.
Yeah, well, this speaks volumes, doesn't it, for these so-called shrewd capitalists? They're basically just like sheep. You
Well,
just see one
exactly.
one
And
person,
and
like, "Oh,
the thing that just made me feel sick to my stomach about reading this Theranos story for the first time is looking at the lists of awards and the
yeah,
lists of incredibly not just famous people. Bloody what's her name?
Henry Kiss."
Gwyneth Paltrow has her Goo Lab or whatever, and everyone just says, "Oh, whatever." But someone like Henry Kissinger, like an
Yeah,
elder statesman, you just think, how can you trust any institution again when you see how gullible these people are? How and not just on the short term. I remember there's that famous uh I think it's by Brass Eye, that sketch where they invent a drug called cake, and they go round to
thick. It's a made-up drug.
yeah, exactly. And they go around and they get all these people to read out, and I can't remember which MP it was, but there was an MP who felt
Basildon.
oh yes, of
Yeah.
course, who fell for it, and everyone was saying, "Oh, that's ridiculous." But I mean, the thing is, if someone walks into your office and they've been scheduled by the meeting's been scheduled by your assistant who you trust, and they come in and they've got branding and they've got a media crew, and they tell you something that sounds a bit ridiculous, but basically you can believe, you can be forgiven for falling for it for a day or two. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people who invested millions, who signed up to be on the executive board of this company, who presumably had to look through all of its documentation and all of its patents, all of its patent applications, and nothing tipped them off at any point in that process. How long
I
was this
think,
company active for?
I'd say maybe a few years, like 5 years maybe.
So more than long enough for people to clock on that this was bollocks.
I don't know about that, but, well, I mean, people did though. Like, people who are working in the trenches, like, they had basically their internal policy was one of, like, um, uh, cover up with extreme prejudice. Like, if
Yeah.
anybody said even a minor slight against the product or the company. It was lawsuits, it was threats, it was
Yeah.
everything. But the people, basically, the scam, right, is that if she's got her board members, and those board members are so prominent, then any investor who turns up, they're not going in and talking to Joe Bloggs in the lab, who's
Yeah.
like desperately trying to get this to work. They're talking to Henry Kissinger
Yeah.
or Michael. Was Michael Flynn on there? No, it was some other Mattis. That's right,
Yeah.
Jim
Yeah.
Mattis. And Jim Mattis doesn't know shit about fucking biotech. He's there because he thinks it's exciting,
Yeah.
and
That
he
is.
sits in the board meetings, and he gets, Katie Holmes tells them how they've now managed to get Walgreens, that one of the biggest grocers in the United States, is going to be carrying the Theranos product out to the people.
Yeah.
It's going to be, like you can see why these
But
people,
that
despite
again
their,
is putting a finger on a really important point, because uh, I understand exactly how that could happen, because exactly the same thing happens in academic science. And you must have experienced the same thing as well, where there's some idea or there's some, hot topic that everybody kind of knows is probably bollocks, but a bunch of famous professors have got on board with it, and nobody is going to turn around to a really famous professor who commands huge amounts of funding, whose name is globally known. No postdoc, no junior academic is going to turn around and challenge them and say, your idea is bullshit, and here's why. No one in their right mind is going to do that. And it's so telling when you come across these stories that they always do this. They always surround themselves with these public figures as this defensive cloak, so that if anybody says, well, what you're doing is obviously bullshit,
yeah,
they can say, well, are you saying that Henry Kissinger is full of bullshit? I mean, yes, obviously. But, are you going to say that? Are you really going to go on the news and say that? Are you going to stake your reputation on that? There was a really
yeah,
interesting video by, it wasn't Numberphile, it was Stand Up Maths, which is a channel done by I think like a maths lecturer or something, and he did a really good one about the whole meme about Michael Bloomberg when he was still in the Democratic, still running for the Democratic nomination, and the meme was something like Bloomberg spent $350 million on his campaign. There are 300 million people in the US. Why didn't he just give everyone in America $1 million? Yeah.
yes,
And the thing is that it's not just like that went up on Twitter. It ended up going on national news, and there were, videos of news anchors repeating this to each other. And of course, everybody was ripping into them and saying, oh my God, how could anybody make such a basic mistake live on air? But he made the important point that if you're in that position, you're on the news, and you get this piece of paper in front of you that says, this is the story, are you
yeah,
really going to be the person who says, hang on, this is obviously wrong, this is obviously bullshit? Are you really going to be the person to do that? Because imagine how embarrassing it would be if you were wrong. Making
yeah.
such
That
a
is true.
making such a public statement that is against what everybody else, against the consensus, against what everybody else is saying, and then being wrong. You would be so humiliated, and your reputation is already pretty small time, so you would never recover.
Yes, yes.
And that's the thing that is just so insidious. And I don't know if you've experienced it. I definitely have, where you have these ideas and they stick around for decades and they suck up money.
What?
What was that? What was that?
What? I just had something in my throat.
Racetrack memory.
Yeah.
And yeah, they just stick around for decades. They never go away because they've got enough famous people backing them that everyone senior enough to actually challenge it is in bed with the situation, and
Or they don't care because
or
they've
they
got their.
or they just don't care. And
Mm.
all the people who are junior and are angry and want to challenge it don't have the power to do anything.
No, no. The Interestingly, the Theranos scandal was ultimately, I mean, it would have come out eventually, but it was finally uh, outed by a whistleblower, an
Hmm.
intern nonetheless,
Yeah,
who, uh,
yeah.
who spoke to a reporter, which,
That's one of the extraordinary things about a lot of these stories. I mean, the J.H. Schoen scandal was blown by a reviewer for a paper who wasn't. I don't think they were a particularly famous person.
you're going to
The
have to explain that one.
the J.H. Schoen scandal was a scientist who worked for a number of different organizations, in particular Bell Labs, who in the late 90s and early 2000s, who was billed basically as being probably one, at the time, he was expected to be one of the greatest physicists of all time. And he
Yeah.
was believed, he published a number of very famous papers. One of the key ones was apparently showing that you could achieve superconductivity in, I think it was cesium doped C60 at something like 150 Kelvin.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And he'd published a number of papers to this degree. He'd also published a number of papers about ambipolar transistors based on organic materials.
Yeah.
And then it was discovered in, I think, 2002, I think, that all of his papers were false. Every single one that he'd ever published was
Wow.
falsified, and he'd been getting away with it for decades. And almost all of his papers were retracted, although notably not every single one. In fact, one of them is still getting citations, legitimate citations to this day.
Wow.
Um, he
What was the
was
name of sorry, while we're on the
no,
topic, of intellectual frauds, there was that, Cambridge, I think, based, researcher who recently got
yeah,
done,
last year.
and he's still
Oh
there.
yeah, he's
And
still
he
a
he
college
claimed
fellow. He still
all
has
his
a chair.
postdocs.
Yeah, he threw all of his postdocs under the bus and said that they were responsible. And he ripped off. I'm going
What
to
was
see
he
if I could.
doing again?
He was a researcher into heart disease, I think.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Uh, I'm going
And
to
then there was that
I'm going to
guy,
look him up because
oh,
it's important to keep repeating his name so that people remember.
and there was the guy who there was the primate research guy who it turned out had like primate linguistics specifically. It turned out who'd been just making stuff up for about 10 years, if not more. And like he was one of the core founders of the field, really. And yeah, that was a bit of a blow. Um, and then there's all the X-ray crystallography guys in China. Was it China? Um, who
I don't know this story.
Yeah, there was some X-ray crystallographer who claimed to have discovered a load of new crystal structures, and then it just turned out he just made them up, just like drew them down on a bit of paper.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's these things, they're only increasing, and
Yeah,
they're increasing rapidly.
and well, I don't know. Is it increasing, or like is the rate per scientist per year
Well, it's
increasing?
one of these difficult things, isn't it? Because you don't know whether it's actually increasing or whether reporting is increasing.
That's
That's
I possibly think that might be the case. I mean,
It might be the case, but one of the things that is very difficult about the situation at the moment in academic research is there's just so much more money in it than there used to be.
yeah,
That you it would be so rare to have any academic who was receiving £2.5 million a year,
yeah.
before the year 2000. That would be so unbelievably rare.
Yeah.
But
Well, it's not like back in the day when you just had to be born into the landed gentry, and then,
yeah,
live a life of luxury whilst, like,
well, indeed. I mean,
trying
you could argue that academia was pretty kind of institutionally corrupt for most of its history on that basis. But the act of actually, well, I mean, in a sense, that is also part of the problem. Is that back in the day, you didn't have to make up research in order to have a cushy job in a university because no one gave a fuck what you were doing
No.
as long as you were from the right background. Whereas now,
Yeah.
if you do want to keep your chair, you do have to keep up making up research. Well, or you could do legitimate research, but who has the time for that?
It's
Um,
true.
but
It's
yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too much into bashing academia, but it's when you read these things like the Theranos scandal, or the stuff about Hyperloop. What's so enraging about it to me is that you're seeing all the same beats that you see in academia. The arrogance, the obsession with individual success, the obsession with excellence, the concept of the disruptive genius. So, one of the things that I just find amazing about this is, where was she a student? Was it Stanford or was it Harvard?
Stanford, I think.
Stanford. And
I might be wrong about that,
and
but
in the biography of her, it says that this whole thing started because in the second year of her degree, she walked into her tutor's office and said that while on a placement doing blood analysis, she had come up with this amazing idea that would revolutionize blood testing, and would the university report it? And her tutor initially said no, but then later she managed to convince people to do it. Now, I obviously, there are implications about maybe nepotism or about nefarious like backroom deals, because of course she was the child of a very, very wealthy VC who had worked for a number of companies, including Enron, which I just find hilarious. But so but the thing is that I don't know if you've had this. I definitely had it. In my last university, where students would come into my office and they would say, I've found this amazing thing, I just learned about such and such and I've invented something. And the thing that you would do is you would sit down with them and you would say, now, it's great that you're very enthusiastic, but look, this is what you've just suggested to me. This is where the field is. Try to bear in mind that you're still, on your journey, you're still learning. And you shouldn't expect to be able to revolutionize physics in the second year of your degree. Spend a bit more time understanding your idea first. You don't just say, great, here's $9 billion.
yeah,
Who
I
the
mean, but
fuck does that?
I guess you know, to obviously you're correct, but I would also draw attention to the fact that I think the reason why she managed to succeed, because in if you look at the actually what she was trying to achieve, she was working in the field of biotechnology, right, and working on something which was incredibly difficult and had a long established industry which was performing the thing that she wanted to break into, and she needed to, in inverted commas, disrupt it. Now, first, the word disrupt is a term which has come out of tech, the tech sector, not the tech sector, as in like the Silicon Valley tech sector.
Yeah.
And that points to a key feature of her scam, which is that despite working in the biotech industry, she started herself and Theranos as a tech company,
Yeah.
and things like
And when you say, just to
young
clarify, when
young
you're saying tech company, what you really mean is software, right? That's
Yeah, that's
primarily what you're talking
correct.
about.
Yeah, and but the key difference between a software company and a biotech company is that one of them makes software and the other one makes a biotechnology instrument.
Yeah.
Whereas, with software, broadly speaking, if you think of an idea, software idea, right? I mean, you can probably implement it, like
Mhm.
whatever it is within reason, like assuming that you're not trying to like, you know, crack fucking RSA encryption or something like that. Like, you can if it can be done in an efficient amount of time, no matter what it is that you're trying to do, you can do it.
Hmm.
Like the internet is amazing. Distributed computing is amazing. Like the language that we have are amazing. And the idea that somebody in second year of undergraduate could come up with an idea and then go out and convince people to help it implement it, and then find people who are
Mhm.
qualified, hire them, and implement the idea is not crazy at all. It's been done many, many
In
times. Like
software.
that is
Yeah.
in software.
Yeah.
But when you're trying to build a device that works, has to be
Mhm.
engineered in real life using technologies that haven't even been invented yet.
Yeah.
It's just a whole different ballgame.
Yeah,
And
you're absolutely right, because the thing is that developing a physical product is a completely different product development path. And it's so much more difficult. And I guess that's the thing that was baffling me, as I was sitting there, and there's this, in reading the biography of Elizabeth Holmes, there's this huge gap between, the storybook moment when she walked into her tutor's office and said, I have an invention that's going to revolutionize the world, and the point where she's running a company valued at $9 billion. There's a massive gap between those two events that doesn't which seems to be a vacuum. And that's where all the critical questions should be coming. Because if someone is developing a new invention, that gap is the point where, I don't know, they spend 5 years working out of a tiny lab that they can barely sustain to try to develop the first prototype. But you're right that the thing is that if you're a software developer, you don't do that. You do walk in and you say, I've got this amazing idea, and then you sit down and you come up with a first prototype on the computer you have in your bedroom, and you try to make it work and then show it to people. And it can be that fast, and it can be that, I don't want to say easy because it's not easy, but it can be that quick between coming up with the idea and developing something that actually shows that your idea is valid.
Yeah.
And I guess that is what you're describing is the fundamental problem at the root of all of this bullshittery. Because Hyperloop is exactly the same. The video you sent me that triggered all this, where that guy, it starts sort of with the CEO of Hyperloop giving that interview, where he's like, "Oh yeah, by 2021, you'll be able to ride from LA to San Francisco in 10 minutes or whatever it is, and I will guarantee you the first ticket, and we'll have a date in January of 2021." And it's the same bullshit. It's just no one at any point has sat down with a really sensible, level-headed engineer or really experienced person and said, how long realistically does it take to build a 200-mile long vacuum pipe? That question has never been asked of anybody.
No.
It's just like, yeah, charismatic CEOs who are used to selling the most dreamy, ridiculous vision that they can get away with, doing that 24/7, and at no point is anyone stepping in and taking the reins and saying, shut up, stop talking crap, because we're gonna get found out.
Yeah, well, ultimately, they don't care whether they get found
No.
out or not. People
Well,
like
yeah.
Elon Musk, or these. Well, I mean, the guy who you were referring to was more of an obscure character who was probably much more. Well, I mean, Elon Musk is a scam artist, but he's kind of a scam artist in a meta kind of
Well,
way.
he's a scam
Um,
artist that's been scammed, hasn't he? Because he's been duped by Elon Musk to taking the fall for this whole bullshit.
yeah, but I mean, I guess I'm trying to say that he's uh, what am I trying to say? I don't know what I'm trying to say. I've lost my train of thought. Sorry.
Sorry, James. That was
That's all right.
because I'm rambling. But I mean, things like a whole other topic, but that deep mind thing that you sent me the other day. Now that is a very different ball game, of course, and it is software, which does mean that what they're describing is fundamentally more feasible. But one of the reasons I'm so cynical about things like that is because there's just been so many incidents where people make these extraordinary claims. Private technology firms make these extraordinary, amazing claims, and they're reported in all of the most prestigious press, and they're backed up by top professors, and they're backed up by very serious people who really know what they're talking about. And then it just transpires that it's all a whole load of horseshit, and there was
Yeah.
nothing there. And I don't even trust myself anymore. I read, something like the DeepMind thing. Oh, they've solved this protein folding problem. Look, here's a graph of it working. Here's all the problems that it's solved. Here's a professor from MIT saying how great it is. But I don't trust it. I don't trust it for a second.
No, I mean, ultimately, if you work in academia at all, that's pretty much a default reaction if
Yeah.
anyone makes any kind of claim
The
about
point
anything.
the point and the reason is very simple, because the point where I trust a piece of scientific work is when it's published and I can look at the paper and I can say, here I can see it working, I can see it's been properly peer reviewed, I can see all of the references to the existing literature, I can see it's been properly, sensibly written, And
Yeah.
that is convincing. And even that on its own isn't convincing. It has to be part of a whole context of multiple independent labs who have all independently confirmed the result. And then I trust it. And the thing is, that is not being excessively onerous. That is the scientific method. But for some reason, companies like Google and like Tesla and like Theranos just think that that is all a waste of time. That's an inconvenience. Why do you have to hate dreamers so much, you flipping commies? It's just, it's no wonder that the world is fucked when all of this money that could be going to funding the solution to real problems is going into this bullshit.
Yes, I agree. The I think it's a feature, or at least maybe a evolution of, or a manifestation of, or some other verb of um, tech utopianism, like this an idea that, yes, one of the greatest inventions mankind's ever made is the internet,
Hmm.
and yes, compute one of the greatest inventions mankind has ever made is the computer, and yes, private industry did, you know, uh, contribute to at least bringing computing to the people.
Hmm.
Um, and, our society today is founded, really, modern society is founded on these devices, and these technologies that this sector at least claim, and if not, had a part in creating. But it means that when you have people, well, I mean, yeah, Elon Musk is, yeah, but more generally, um, you have uh, organizations who are supposed to be holding people to account, such as news organizations and
Patent
um,
offices.
patent offices and other, you know, people in academia, other businessmen, just everybody, is almost hypnotized
Yeah.
by this this phenomenon,
Yeah.
which this perceived phenomenon of the tech.
And
Well, I
it's
mean,
it's
it's not even a
ultimately about
revolution.
like it's ultimately about personality, right? The reason these people achieve what they achieve is not because their ideas are revolutionary, it's because they have the personality to sell this ideal of the disruptive tech genius. If you
And
if
the
you
connection,
if you sorry,
and the connections.
and the
Sorry.
well, and the connections as well. I mean, it's no no one should be surprised that the daughter of an Enron VC suddenly can magic £1 million out of the air.
Right. And
I mean,
also,
the absurdity of Forbes listing her as a self-made billionaire, self-made. Her dad signed her first $1 million investment. How the
yeah.
fuck is she self-made?
Yeah, but yes, you're right. It is it is a song. That's what I was going to say, which is that it's not on relating to connections, and how it's not a coincidence that the sort of prototypical uh, tech entrepreneur disruptor story, they almost all drop out of
Yeah,
one Ivy League university, and it's not because they're fucking smart. Like, I'm sure most of them are like pretty
they're
intelligent,
well
but they're not
educated,
superhuman.
but there's
The
there's a
reason
big
why they
difference.
were able is because these institutions, they have networking
Yeah,
capabilities. Like, if you go to Harvard and Stanford, you meet people who facilitate you to implement these sorts of things.
I mean, one of the questions I always want to ask people who are obsessed with the idea of hereditary intelligence or inherent intelligence is, you think that for the vast majority of human history, the only people who could read were uh, aristocrats or a very small middle class. So,
Yeah.
do people who believe this genuinely believe that for the majority of human history, 90%, 95% of the human race just had bad genes? Do they
Well, I mean,
genuinely believe that?
you
And
say
then
that as if,
somehow in the 1920s, 1930s, over the space of less than a generation, the vast majority of the human race suddenly had good genes.
But well, I mean, you say that like it's some historical thing. Like there are people now who
Yeah.
believe that like financial success in life is only dependent on your intelligence. So yes, I entirely believe
So,
that people.
where does a lottery winner fit into that? Their
Well,
IQ suddenly increases 50 points when they have a
they
winning lottery
they
ticket.
you see they had the smarts to go out and buy the lottery ticket in the first place, Tim.
Yes, unlike all the people who bought lottery tickets and lost, and they're too stupid, and they're paying the hope tax.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's not complicated.
Oh, God.
We live in a deterministic universe, Tim.
Yes.
You know,
Well,
you are.
ultimately, that's what it's all about, isn't it? It's the divine
Yeah.
right of kings. You take all of these crazy beliefs about entitlement to wealth and how the billionaires are entitled to have power over the world because they are the chosen ones who had the it's just divine right of kings. That's all it
It
is.
is.
It's divine right of kings reinvented for the
Yeah.
modern age.
Yeah.
But oh god, yeah,
Um,
this story is just it is everything. It's every absurd tech scam ever rolled into one.
I knew you'd like it.
I really can see why it's so popular online
Yeah, it's
because
wild, man. It's
yeah,
fully wild. She's considering going for a uh, mental I don't know what you call it in the United States. Like basically like insanity defense, which is hilarious.
yeah. I mean, it's good that at least she's going to court because the way that most of these articles ended, most of the articles that I read were written a year or more ago, and most of them were concluding with just like, yeah, she just basically took the investments, liquidated the company, and left. And I was thinking that this was going to be another OneCoin thing where it was just like, yeah, she got $10 billion and just fucked off, and no one knows where she is now, and she got away with it.
Yeah, but the thing is that OneCoin defrauded poor people,
Of
whereas
course. Oh yes,
Theranos
yeah.
defrauded rich people.
That was her critical mistake. Not so smart after all, was she? She really, what she should have done is she should have been selling these blood tests to desperate people online, and then no one would have come after her.
Well, I mean, she did sell her blood tests to desperate people and had 1 million blood tests invalidated by the Health Regulatory Agency, putting the health of
Oh
many
god,
hundred thousand people at risk.
that is so
So
depressing.
that's
And
fun.
there's another thing. It's like governments back these people. Governments and
Yes, Tim. We all know that governments are, in fact, not infallible. In fact, one might go so far as to say is that they are, in fact, staffed by people
of
who have.
course. But I guess my point is, how can it, shit like this makes the job of people who believe in a reasoned future for humanity so much harder because how do you sit there and explain to people that science is good, you should trust science, universities and intellectuals are knowledgeable people and you should listen to their expert advice. Governments, it's important that we have strong government that is well structured so that it can guide society and ensure that our infrastructures are maintained. How do you convince people of that kind of thing when there are stories like this around where all three of those supposedly trustworthy public institutions fell hook, line, and sinker for the ramblings of a crazy person?
Well, I think ultimately, to give government its get out clause, um, it's ultimately the health regulatory bodies did step in once
Yeah,
there was
eventually.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, like, yeah, it's you could argue that they should have got in there earlier and like done the all of this kind of stuff, but they were perpetrating a very sophisticated fraud. Like they were carrying out blood tests on devices that were stock devices basically, and then purporting that it was coming from Theranos themselves. Like this was an active attempt to conceal their fraud, and therefore
That's really
the
interesting. I didn't realize that they were actually performing legitimate blood tests and pretending that they were the result of their product.
Yeah,
That
that's what I
puts a new
understand.
spin on it. In that way, it's almost like a sort of medical devices Ponzi scheme, right? Where they're putting out that they're taking in contracts to do testing, performing it on in secret using somebody else, and then using those fraudulent uh, blood test results to attract more investment in the hope that they'll be able to get their legitimate product, well, it wasn't legitimate, but get the product that they're actually saying they're going to sell off the ground before their creditors drop the hammer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
And
Um,
ironically, that's basically exactly what Enron did. So it seems like this lady really was paying attention to her father's example.
yeah, was Enron officially a Ponzi
I
scheme?
don't think it was officially a Ponzi scheme, but isn't that essentially what they were
Mm,
doing? Was pulling in more investments and desperately
not
trying to pay off their debts in order to keep the
not
company afloat?
not quite, no. Um, it was more that they were hiding their losses in a series of shell corporations.
Oh, okay,
Um, yeah, that's what they were doing.
okay, that's rather different then.
Well, that was just the dodgy accounting that they were doing. I mean, they were also doing horrific things with the energy market.
But
Cause,
it's still the same kind of tactic, which is to try to publicly make your company seem more valuable than it is, so that you
yeah,
can continue to attract investment in the hope that you'll be able to pay off your debts before everything explodes.
yeah, I think that's right. Although it's questionable as to whether or not the people at the top of Enron ever thought that they were going to
They just hope that they'd
achieve
be able to
solvency.
bail out before they
Well, or
themselves
just
ended up in
make
the
the
dark.
losses disappear. You know,
Mm.
through some Byzantine, labyrinth of shell
Yeah.
corporations. Um, Yeah,
Oh, it's fascinating.
yeah,
Fascinating and horrifying. It's like watching a car crash, but the car is the entire world.